Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We're going to give it a minute or two just to see if people just trickle in. So I'll be back in a minute or two. Thanks. Hello, everyone. Um, just before we start, can everyone see my screen and hear me? In the chat on the right-hand part of your screen, could you let me know if you can hear me or not? No? Yes? No? Okay. All right. Um, So welcome everyone to our second webinar with the Professional Development Webinar Series with our FPSA Women's Council. And so today's agenda will give you guys an update of what the Women's Council has been up to, as well as upcoming events that we have. You'll get to hear our guest speaker, Eric Herrincole, talk about hiring rock stars and avoiding zombies. And then we ask that you hold your questions till after Eric's presentation, and so we can do a question and answer portion then. Oh, and for questions, please type that in the chat box on the right hand of your screen. All right, what is the Women's Council? So FPSA Women's Council, our purpose is to have this forum to facilitate positive transformation for women in the food and beverage industry and to help increase employment of women in the food and beverage industry as well as manufacturing, and to provide and build awareness to strengthen and maintain the membership and participation of our organization, Food Processing Suppliers Association, as well as our Trade Show Process Expo. The FPSA Women's Council is tailored for all women, regardless of your position, age, or individual situation held within your company. So our Women's Council also has committees, and we are inviting everyone to join a committee. We have events, fundraising, professional development, and recruitment. We've already started so many great things and great activities this year. Our events committee has held many meetups at different trade shows that has happened earlier this year. Examples were IPPE, the Cheese Show, as well as Pet Food Forum.
And Food Automation Conference.
Food Automation Conference. And our professional development has started their webinar series. Earlier this year, we had a mindfulness workshop webinar, and now now you are with us in our second webinar. We are still looking for volunteers, as I mentioned earlier. So if you are interested in joining any of the committees listed on the screen, feel free to give us a call or email. Our contact information will be at the end of this presentation. So this is a great way to expand your network and get to know more people in the industry. We do have upcoming events. In May, we will be at the Craft Brewers Conference. We have a meetup there at booth 1134 at 2 p.m. Another event we have in July 19th through the 21st, we will be at the AMP convention. There'll be meetups on the 20th as well as the 21st. September 15th, we will actually have an FPSA Women's Council dinner. So it's a hosted dinner by the council to help launch the FPSA Sales Conference. And in September 18th through the 19th is the FPSA Sales Conference.
So membership in this new community is free, so please get involved. It's a great way to expand your network, be a part of the change, help us to support one another, provide professional and personal development for women throughout the food and beverage industry, and have fun.
And now I'd like to introduce Kathleen Chance. Kathleen is one of our co-chair women for the Professional Development Committee. Kathleen?
Great. Thank you, Elena. Yes, again, my name is Kathleen Chance. I'm with Tomer Sorting Solutions, and I am the co-chair with Diane West, who is Diane Wolf. She's actually at a board meeting and can't attend today. So I just wanted to give you just a really quick overview of the Professional Development Committee. We've just had our first kickoff meeting with the entire committee. We've got about 20 members so far. The Professional Development Committee, our purpose is to assess professional development needs and interests of our Women's Council members and FPSA members, and we organize and provide training such as this to our council members and FPSA members. We're also going to be providing links to various educational tools that you can click on via the website as soon as that's available. We'll let you know. But there's lots of different free and slightly opportunities with just a slight cost where you guys can get some more professional development outside of the webinars we provide. All right, so with that said, I think we might be ready for introducing our guest speaker. Our guest speaker is Eric Herrenkahl, and he is the president of Herrenkahl Consulting. He's been in the business for a number of years and is an author, a mentor, and an advisor to CEOs. He's also recognized in the Business Week, Fox News, NBC News, various publications and journals, Monster.com, LinkedIn, Talent Blog, Career Realtor, etc. He's got a plethora of experience that we can all learn from during his presentation and afterwards. He will also make his contact information available to anyone who's interested in contacting him about his services. Eric, take it away.
Terrific. Kathleen, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And it's very nice to be with you all. So the topic I'm immediately addressing today is how to hire more rock stars and avoid zombies. I'm going to share my screen. Let's make sure I get everything set here. There we go. So can everybody see? Everybody can see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
Very good. Thank you. So I'm going to talk about hiring rock stars and avoiding zombies. And this is in the context of my new book that's coming out next year called Crowbar, How to Pry Away Top Talent. So I am a headhunter, and I've been in this business for a number of years. The last book I wrote, How to Hire A Players, was named as one of the top 10 recruiting books ever written by Recruiter.com. And I just love sharing my insights, and I hope that you get some value out of it today. So I always say that if you're going to talk to me longer than 30 seconds, I'd like to know what your point is. And we're all going to spend some time here together. So let me give you a quick roadmap for what I'd like to cover. First is introduction and key decisions, and the big idea out of this program. Second section is on A-player definitions. So we'll talk a little bit about what does it mean to be an A-player, and I'll talk a little bit about why definitions and defining what an A-player looks like is so important. Number 3, recruiter-in-chief. We'll talk about why it's so important for you to be recruiter-in-chief for your own team, for your own business. Number 4, we'll talk about how do you pry away top talent. And one of my basic theories here, not theories, observations, is, every company, whether it's the largest companies in the world, I've done a lot of work with Nestle over the years, or, a strong small business, every business wants and needs top talent in the economy in which we all operate. Most times, not all the time, but most times, top talent currently has a job. So you have to figure out how to attract folks from what they're doing today to your organization. How do you go about doing that? Then we're going to talk specifically about spotting rock stars and avoiding the walking dead, which means how do you vet candidates once you find them? You got people in the process. How do you know if they're any good? And how do you know if they're really a problem child that you want to avoid? And then we'll wrap up. I'm going to try to move at a reasonably good pace. I'm going to try to cover as much material as I can in probably about 30 minutes, just because I know everybody's busy. Then we'll open it up for question and answer, and then we'll wrap. So with that, off we go. So key decisions from the program. The 2 things that I'd like you to take away from this are, how do you identify, recruit, and hire the right people, even if they're currently employed? Number 1. And number 2, how can you get better at hiring rock stars and avoiding the walking dead? The big idea here is that if you're a good leader in a strong business, you can recruit top currently employed talent, even if you don't have a big recruiting department or a big recruiting budget. So while I've done a range of work for different companies, when I speak, I often speak for business audiences where there are a lot of small and mid-sized businesses represented. They don't have big recruiting departments, they don't have big budgets, but they are good, they're savvy, they're scrappy. If that describes you, then there are going to be strategies here that you can use to go out and find top talent. Section 1. So what does an A-player look like? I'm just going to give you a couple quick definitions. My first definition of an A-player is to say that an A-player is the top 10% of talent that's available for a particular role at a particular level of compensation. Top 10% of talent available for a particular role at a particular level of compensation. One of the reasons that definition is very important is that I believe we can strive to hire A-players for every position in our company. Meaning you can hire an A-player CEO making whatever your CEO makes, but a fair amount. You can hire an A-player receptionist making $25,000 or $30,000 a year. But you can find who are the best people available for that role at that level of compensation and seek to bring them into the business. A little bit more from a gut level, I think an A-player is somebody who can do a particular job better than you can do it or I could do it, and you don't worry that they're going to get it done. So I don't need you to do everything. In my business, I don't need you to do everything that I do, but if you do marketing and social media better than I do, which by the way is not that tough to do, and I don't worry that you're going to execute and get it done, and it's a light that I can turn off in my own mind, hey, you're an A-player. And that makes a big contribution. So I always ask audiences, and I'll ask you to do the same thing. Imagine, if you could, that in the coming 9 months, let's say the rest of 2018, you hire just one more A-player for your business. For how many of you would hiring just one more A-player really show up for you. It would make a real positive difference and contribution for your business. Now, we're not all together sitting in a room, but I guarantee you 90% of you said it absolutely would show up. I've never spoken to an audience that didn't say that. That's pretty remarkable if you think about it. There are very, very few things in business that if you could do it one time a year, it actually makes a difference. Most things you have to do over and over and over and over again to get them to show up. Hiring one A player would show up for you, which means hiring 2 or 3 would be huge, and hiring a handful literally could transform your business. So this is a strategic, high-value topic that all of us, no matter what our leadership or management role, need to be paying attention to. Okay, so from there, let's talk a little bit about Recruiter in Chief. I'm going to tell you a story about how I even came up with this concept. But something to keep in mind here is these are things to do. Ideally, these are things to do before you need to hire somebody, before you have a job to fill. Now, they're valid if you're in the midst of scrambling around trying to find somebody to hire for a particular role. But ideally, you get in the habit of doing these things before you ever have the need. So the CEO or the team leader or the manager, fill in your title as Recruiter in Chief. So it's been almost 15 years ago. I was speaking at the Engineers Club in St. Louis, Missouri. Kind of typical lunch speaker. You can picture it, about tables of 8 spread all over the room. There are probably 100 people in the room. And of those 100, I would say 99 of them were professional engineers between the ages of 25 and 35, otherwise known as happy hunting grounds if you happen to have an engineering-based company. And my guess would be many or most of you on this call, engineers play an important role in your company. So you can picture this. This is a room you'd like to be in. 99 professional engineers between the ages of 25 and 35. And then I got one guy who is stage left of me, 55, polished, professional, quietly holding court at his table of 8. Now, I got my share of weaknesses, but I'm exceptionally curious. I'm always interested to know why. Why is he here? Who is this guy? Because none of his friends are in the room. So I made sure after the program to make my way over to him. Now, my tongue-in-cheek way of saying this, I live in Philadelphia, and home of the Philadelphia Eagles, if you hadn't heard. And in Philly, my joke is if I saw somebody who didn't fit, I'd walk up to him, I'd say, "Hi, I'm Eric. What's your name and what are you doing here?" But this is the Midwest. This was St. Louis. Many of you are from the Midwest. You don't talk like that, at least in St. Louis, Missouri. So I was a lot nicer about it. And I said, his name is John. I said, "John, it's very nice to meet you. What's the value that you find for participating in this group?" But he looked me right in the eye and he kind of gave me a Philly answer. He said, "Eric, that's very simple. I'm Recruiter in Chief for my business." He was showing up every month at this lunch meeting because he wore the Recruiter in Chief hat for his entire business. He ran a geotechnical engineering company. He hired a lot of engineers. He was there very, very intentionally. So I would say for you as a leader that becoming Recruiter in Chief for your team, however that big or small that team is, you may have one person working for you, but understanding that leaders who are willing to be Recruiter in Chief are the ones who get ahead because they're the ones who surround themselves with the best people. And it's, business, like life, is a team sport. It's all about who we're doing things with. You figure out how to surround yourself with the best people, and you have a significant advantage over the competition. So think about what it means to be Recruiter in Chief. Let me give you a couple implications of what I think it means. As Recruiter in Chief, one of the things that you're always doing is scouting for your farm team. Now, I referred to the Eagles before, so we watched a lot of football in Philadelphia. I have 4 kids, and my youngest one is 12 and is a basketball fanatic. He's a complete fanatic. I've watched more basketball in the last 2 years than I've ever watched in my life. But I love baseball, and I love watching baseball. And one of the things that I love about baseball from a recruiting standpoint is their farm system. Now, so if you're not a baseball fan, if you're a major league team, whether you're the Phillies or the Cardinals or the Yankees or the Indians or whoever you are, you have a huge network of minor league teams spread all over the country that field full teams and guys who are playing every day. And if you have somebody on your major league team who goes down, like tonight, you'll fly somebody up. You could have them in uniform and on the field this evening, certainly by tomorrow. from one of those farm teams. I encourage my clients to think about that farm team for their own business, meaning people who do not work for you today, but people with whom you are connected. You have some sense of connection, whether you have a full-blown friendship, I don't know, but you know them, and they're the kind of people that either would make great players on your team or they're talent scouts who you can tap into their networks. One of the things that's very important when you start thinking about referrals is you have to figure out who is good, because we're not really interested in who's looking. And any of you who've done any amount of hiring have probably run into this problem, is you ask people for referrals, or people call you with a referral, except the person who's calling you with your referral is your Uncle Charlie, who wants you to help get your nephew Nicky a job. And Nicky is a very nice boy, but he's not exactly qualified to be your controller, or to be a new salesperson, or to be an engineer in your operations department. Most people have absolutely no idea what it takes to do the jobs that we need done. So our job is to figure out who's good in those particular roles. If we hire engineers, we got to be hanging out with engineers and figuring out how to connect with them. Or we've got to know referral sources, which we'll talk about in a minute, who really understand our jobs, understand what it takes to do them, and are going to provide us with quality referrals. One of the very specific strategies that I always take is making sure to take time to meet with big dogs. And what I mean by that is people who you think there is no way in a million years that person will ever come to work for me or for my business. They're working for a big company, they're making a ton of money, there's no way they could come here, but they would be awesome. I mean, it would be amazing to meet with, to know, it would be amazing to be able to bring them in. If you get a shot at meeting that person, you always meet them. Here's a story. So I was working on I do retained executive search is my specific focus. And then I have a network of other recruiters that work at all levels and in all different kinds of businesses. So this was for a senior vice president of manufacturing operations. It was in the automotive supply chain. And the total compensation package, by the time you're all said and done, let's say the person was going to make $350,000. Yeah, it was a privately held business. So I got referred to a guy who's making $1 million a year easy, $1 million plus. I mean, there's no way he's the right guy for this job. He's just making too much money. But you know what? He took my call because people at that level always know that tomorrow could be their last day. He referred me to 2 or 3 people who had worked for him in the past who might be a good fit. And 6 months later, he called me because his company was getting acquired and he wanted to see if I could give him some help on a CEO or COO search. So again, we want to know who's good. We don't want to know who's looking. If you meet enough good people and figure out how to cultivate those connections, they're the people who are going to get you to the real talent. And I've already really touched on this. Develop relationships with deeply connected people. I'll give you an interesting number. The life insurance industry is very sophisticated when it comes to recruiting. It's really all they do, and they've been measuring everything since the 1950s. If you or I are a sales manager working in the life insurance business, and our only job is to recruit, that's what we do. And if we have to recruit a new life insurance agent cold, we've got no referral sources, we don't know anybody, we just got to literally get online, get on LinkedIn, figure out how we come up with some names and cold call. It's going to take us about 200 calls, they've figured out, before we actually sign somebody up to come work on our team. You know how many calls you have to make on average if you have a really strong referral network? 6. So would you rather make 6 calls or 200? Those are easy numbers. So developing the right referral sources, knowing people who know lots of people in your industry and who really know what it takes to do the kind of jobs that you're often hiring for, those people are worth their weight in gold. And you got to cultivate them. It's not enough to just connect with them. I mean, it's important, but you have to cultivate. And when I say cultivate, I don't mean you have to call them every month, but maybe it's every quarter you're staying in touch. Maybe you're giving them a quick phone call. People who you have on your short list of really talented candidates or really strong referral sources, how can you help them? I mean, it's networking 201, not 101, but 201. But you've got to stay in touch with those folks and cultivate those relationships. Among other things, you never know when somebody who is super happy in their job yesterday has something happen and all of a sudden they're looking, and you may only know if you stay in touch with them. And finally, reward employees for referrals for recruiting, for hiring. And this is actually very congruent with everything I've been talking about on referral sources. Who understands better what it takes to do a job or to work at your company than somebody who's doing the job or working at your company? They actually really understand. And if they like their job and they like working for you, then they're the best people. They ought to be actively recruiting. So absolutely put a financial incentive in place for having them generate referrals. And if you want some more details on that, shoot me an email. I'll give you my email at the end, and I'd be glad to exchange some ideas with you on it. Okay, prying talent away. Number one, when we start talking about recruiting currently employed people, i.e., they're not desperate, they're at least getting paid on the 15th and the 30th of every month, and they're fine. They may not be thrilled, but they're fine. We've got to define what's in it for them. I actually spent a fair amount of time with my clients on a position and candidate profile when we're going out for a search. And we define all kinds of things in that, but one of the things that we define is what's in it for them. Are they going to have advancement opportunities? Are they going to be able to do cool work? Are they going to be able to work with great people? Are they going to, what's in it for them? We all know this. I mean, this is common sense, but we also all know if we've been in a hiring mode, it's very easy to skip over this, just list this kind of the requirements of the experiences that somebody has to be a candidate, post it out on Indeed or LinkedIn, and then think we're going to get rock stars. We're not. So we got to put some thought into that, our messaging, because we're going to have to actively market for the role. Okay, now one of the things that I've done here in moving into this next section is I've moved out from before you have a role to fill, and now we've actually got a job to fill, right? I mean, it could be anything from a VP of sales to an accounting manager to a graphic artist. But you need to hire somebody, and anytime you have to hire somebody, the clock is ticking. Somebody's having to do their work. Things are piling up. You need to get the job filled. When that is the case, one of the things that I have found over the years is that, sure, if you can post a job and get enough applicants, and you're good. But if you're going to have to go actively recruit, it's really good to get a recruiting partner. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean a retained executive search consultant like me. It doesn't even necessarily mean an outside recruiting firm. But it does mean maybe somebody who's doing contract recruiting for you. Maybe you have an internal person. And I'll tell you the reason why. It's back to the numbers 6-to-1 versus 200-to-1. Basically, if you're a hiring manager, your job is not to be a recruiter. You have time for 6-to-1. You have time to call referral sources and one way or another say, who do you know? And we'll talk a little bit about how to do that. What you don't have time to do is make 200 cold calls. That you obviously don't have time. But that's a recruiter's job. And so one way to kind of think about it is to say the recruiter's got to be doing all the cold work. You as the hiring manager ought to be doing the warm work. You develop a target list. If you start working with a recruiter who's good, you ought to have a target list of 20 companies where you think the talent is going to be hanging out that you want to reach. I actually have some terrific resources that I utilize for this, where we not only develop the target list of the companies, we figure out who's working in those companies who would be well qualified, potentially well qualified for the job, and we get it down to name, email address, phone number. We know exactly who to call. And one of the cases I always want to make, to people who don't do a lot of recruiting, or at least for whom it's not their primary job, is that the easiest sales call in the world to make, the easiest one, is a recruiting call. Because everybody really wants to know about a good job. Even if you've got a good job, you'd like to know what's out there. People are always interested. So if you've got a good company with a good job, you should feel good about picking up the phone, making a call, or even mentioning it to somebody at a networking event. And one of the ways that somebody just told me that one of the pieces of advice that I gave that helped them was how to talk about an open job at a networking event, because you don't have to be a used car salesman. You can say something like, we're as you know, Jim, we've been growing 15%. We've done that the last several years. We're hiring an accounting manager. I think it's very likely that that person would get promoted to controller in the next couple of years, 2 to 3 years, if they're really good. You're in the financial field. I've always appreciated getting to talk to you. If you have any advice for me on people who are really good that might be a great fit for an accounting manager role and would have the bandwidth to be considered down the road for controller and maybe even CFO, I would really appreciate it. And you could just, you're at a cocktail party. That was, what I'm doing? I'm trying to recruit that guy. because if he's good, he may say, well, wow, that sounds really interesting. I'd love to talk with you about that. So these are very low impact sales calls, if you will, that we can get in the habit of delivering. Okay. Let's just talk for a couple minutes about interviewing and weeding out, weak candidates and identifying rock stars, and then we'll go ahead and open it up for questions. So here's what I've done. I've listed what I believe to be the 7 important components when we're vetting candidates. And I talk about vetting candidates rather than just interviewing candidates, what's our interview process? Because knowing how to interview is very important, but I think there's more that we can do to structure the overall process that, again, helps us to figure out who's good and avoid the walking dead, avoid the people who look good but are actually a nightmare after you hire them. I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to walk through this, give you a description of each. And this is how I do it. On interviews, what I like to do is do a phone interview first and then do an in-person interview if I think they're good enough to invite in. On the phone interview, I start every interview with as quickly as I can. I say, what questions can I answer for you? I always want to try to make it about that person. I always want to make sure that they get their questions answered. And I also always believe that you can learn as much or more about people from the questions that they ask as from the answers that they give. So I do a phone interview, gather some good information that I can utilize, and then an in-person interview. I believe in an in-person interview, you have to have at least one interviewer, or ideally even a pair of interviewers working together who cover an entire resume, meaning that they have the candidate describe what they've done over their entire career. It takes about, you can do it in 60 to 90 minutes, 2 hours for a senior executive. And I know that sounds like an enormous amount of time. If you're hiring, people for a call center and you've got 100% turnover, you can't do that as much. But the reason I say that is because only if we cover an entire employment history can we identify gaps and reasons for leaving and basically the indicators that somebody may be more of a zombie than they are a rock star. There's a lot more that we could talk about that. But I do think that having that end-to-end resume review is really important. You could have other interviewers focus on specific areas of competence or leadership or technical skills, but maybe you and a partner ought to be going through somebody's resume top to bottom. Number 2, references are absolutely critical. It's very, very common in this day and age for people to think that they can skip over references or that references aren't worthwhile. If you know how to ask for references the right way, and you know what to listen for, they're actually extraordinarily valuable. So don't skip the references, make time for those reference calls. And also one of the things I think is very important is always try to identify independent references, meaning references that the candidate has not provided, but who you know well enough and who know the candidate that they can give you some unbiased feedback. The final thing I would say here is always have candidates provide references and always have them sign a written release to give you permission to contact those references. I just think it's good CYA. I do use online testing, whether in leadership or sales or intelligence, and I include those in the interviewing process. I don't think they're the most important thing, but again, if one of the goals here is to identify the walking dead, sometimes those assessments can be really useful because somebody sounds great and you see something pop up on the online assessment and you go, whoa, you start paying more attention to it, you start digging in, and all of a sudden you realize things are not what they seemed. Number 4, live fire vetting exercises. This is basically anything that is not having people answer interview questions. A good example of this would be a sales organization that when they were interviewing potential salespeople would have that candidate give them 15 minutes to put together a super simple PowerPoint on their current product or a past product that they sold. Not the new product that they might be selling, something they've been selling for a year or two or longer. And then they wanted that salesperson to make a pitch to the sales managers at this company. That's a brilliant idea. I mean, listen, if there's a salesperson's any good, they've been doing that presentation hundreds and hundreds of times. They ought to be able to get up there and kill it. If they can't, that tells you something. Number 5, time together out of the office. This is just a basic principle that says we need to figure out how to spend more time with candidates. Typically, even if it's a super hot labor market for software engineers, you can figure out how to at least have a full day or 2/3 of a day interview where you have 2 or 3 interviewers and somebody takes them out to lunch, even if you have to make a decision in that one day, because I have clients that are in that situation. But you've got to take time and ideally get them out of the office, get them in a social situation, and see how they behave. Because sometimes when people take their game face off from the interviewing and they really let down, that's when we realize, man, I'm glad I bought this person lunch, because I would never want to bring them onto my team. Background and drug testing, do it. It's important. And finally, debrief and move with velocity. Debrief means everybody who's interviewed a job candidate or candidates ought to meet together to discuss each candidate relative to a scorecard for the role within 24 hours after interviews are completed. I consider that a non-negotiable. And then move with velocity. And this, my friends, is one of the things that makes this whole art of vetting candidates so challenging. Because in number 5, I told you spend more time with people. And number 7, I'm telling you, but you can't wait around. I had a job candidate for an executive level role that I was recruiting for my client, and she was also interviewing directly with another company. And I ended up successfully recruiting her for my client, in part because the other company just took too long. I don't know why they took so long, but I'll tell you what what this woman told me. She said, they just moved much more slowly than you did, and it made me feel as if they wanted me less. Now listen, objectively, it may have been because the CEO was on vacation in Barbados and wasn't available to meet with her. But how she felt was they wanted her less. That is indicative. You can have the most hard-nosed, financial executive or CEO, but this is a tumultuous time in their life to make a job move. If they feel like a company is not as interested in them as somebody else, it gives the other company an advantage. So that's it. Just to wrap up here, I think the 2 questions that I would have you consider coming out of this program are what are your next actions to build a talent-rich farm system? How are you going to add more people into your garden, add more people into your farm system, identify people who could be great for your company tomorrow, even if they're working for somebody today? And how can you find the referral sources who know those folks and cultivate those relationships? Because as we agreed, 6 calls is a lot easier to make than 200. And then number 2, how are you going to strengthen your candidate vetting process to hire more rock stars and avoid the walking dead? Take whatever you got right now and troubleshoot it, tune it up, figure out how you make it incrementally better. You may not be able to do everything, but I guarantee you, any of us, all of us, can do at least one thing the next time we interview somebody to make us better at figuring out who's good and who's not. So thank you all. I'm going to stick around and take some questions. My email is pretty straightforward, eric@heroncole.com. I'm always interested in what people find useful, what answers out of this were really helpful for you. What did I not touch on that would be useful? Anything like that, email it to me and I'll respond with my answer. I'll try to give you some more information. I do a lot of speaking, a lot of training, both for companies and trade associations. If that's a topic that's of interest, I'd love to talk with you about it as well. And with that, I will turn it back over for question and answer.
All right. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat box on the right hand of your screen or in the questions.
This was really informative, Eric. You had mentioned recruiting people at industry events. Could you identify other places where people could recruit or identify where these rock stars, these big dogs are located, and then just approaching them, that conversation?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things, in any type of marketing, and that's really what we're talking about here, one of the things that's really critical is focus. We're all very, very busy people. And practically speaking, what I'm really asking each of us to do is to figure out that one event that we blow off on a regular basis that we really ought to be attending because there would be good people there to meet. So, I mean, and there are countless events that fit that bill. Maybe that's Chamber of Commerce. Maybe there is a kind of a local chapter of an industry association that you don't spend as much time with, but that you'd be interested in. Maybe there's just one or two people that from the past that would be great to reach out to. It's interesting, the more years we have under our belt in our career, the more people we actually have known along the way who are really in pretty significant roles today. So I would say think about things you're already involved in that you don't go to enough, and that would probably be a great place to start.
We have another question. You mentioned phone interviews, then in-person interviews. Do you think Skype interviews are effective?
I think Skype interviews are right in between. I think they're right in between a phone interview and a in-person. And I'll tell you a story about that. So I had a candidate for an executive search that I was leading. And I did a phone interview with him, and I was just like, man, I'm just not sure I'm hearing it. And he was out of town, and so I thought, I'm not going to fly all the way to this, wherever to meet with him unless I can get a feel. So I thought, I'll do a Skype interview with him. And I did a Skype interview with him. And I thought, I'm still just not sure. I mean, some of his answers were good, but it just didn't seem right. Well, then circumstances kind of worked out, so I was going to be in that person's town. I figured, listen, now I can piggyback, I'll do a second meeting. So he met me at the airport. I talked to him for 10 minutes. I was like, definitively not. There's no way I would ever, present this guy to my client. There's something about face-to-face. Now, again, we have to be very judicious with the use of our time. We can't interview most people face-to-face, and if somebody's not good, we should be spending 10 or 15 minutes, not an hour. But I believe there's no replacement for face-to-face in truly vetting candidates. Then you've got to make a decision on the kind of the return of investment of your time, whether the position for which you're hiring warrants you're investing that kind of time.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Here's another question regarding the online candidate assessment tools.
Yep.
Are many of these tools subjective? Some people aren't good with tests, and they could be disqualified from moving forward despite their experience and their and positive in-person interview potential.
Okay, so there are a number of things there. So a couple things. The assessments that I recommend are the ones in which, so I use a tool called Trimetrics, for instance, and you always have a job benchmark in place, meaning you compare candidates to job-specific skills and priorities. You don't just assess candidates and just say, oh, well, this is interesting, or this person just looks just like me. You have to compare them to a job, and I find that they are. I think they're actually more objective in that perspective. Although I will say, one of the things that you run into, for instance, is that sometimes companies have put together profiles, and people who are more introverted get dinged on assessments because they're not as bubbly and as outgoing as somebody else. But the fact is, they're awesome in the job. So that leads to my second point, which is assessments should never be more than 1/3 of the hiring decision. And it is true, I think, that sometimes companies and executives particularly get very enamored of assessment tools and they overweight them. The tools that I use, I know them backward and forward, inside and out. I know what they tell me and I know what they don't. The number one thing that I think assessment tools are helpful for is helping to weed out people who look good but perform poorly. That's the number one way that I use them. Secondarily, occasionally, somebody's assessment results will pop up that are so incredibly strong that I immediately pick up the phone and call them or call my client and say, hey, we got to pay attention to this person. Everything else in between, I take the assessment, integrate the results with what I find from the interviews and what references say, and that to me kind of creates the best picture that we can create.
Okay, and then another question: for a company that currently does not have a large social media presence and is just starting to develop one, what would you recommend to achieve the best results to boost our recruitment efforts?
Partly that would depend, and I don't know if the person who entered that question, if they can follow up quickly, it depends on the role. So whoever submitted the question, great question. So, let me give you a little bit of background. If you can submit what specific position are you thinking about? Because that affects the type of social media that I would use. For executive level roles today, and we all know, right, with social media, I mean, everything changes all the time. But LinkedIn is still the single best tool to use for social media for reaching executives. Having said that, the more senior the leader, the less likely to, I guarantee they're never going to respond, is it that they're going to respond to a cold outreach via LinkedIn. It's not happening. You got to figure out how to get to them from a referral source. LinkedIn may help you to identify who they are or where they are. Conversely, Facebook and Facebook videos has actually been a very effective tool for some companies that I know for recruiting lower level positions or recruiting more technically related roles. So in part, like everything else in marketing, you got to figure out, where's the talent hanging out and use that social media platform to reach them.
Eric, they responded, and it's normally regional sales managers that work remote.
Regional sales managers that work remotely. At that level, LinkedIn should be an effective tool. I think that would be good. That would be so. If it's just starting a social media presence, I would probably lean towards LinkedIn. But again, I would leverage it. I would expect to get on the phone and actually talk to people, as well as use LinkedIn from a job post and that type of thing.
Eric, we have another question. Can you identify specific assessment tools that you'd recommend in hiring a salesperson, someone in a sales role?
Yep. The tool that I recommend is the TriMetrix assessment. And if that's something that you're interested in, I actually have a complimentary version of it that I can send you, meaning there's no charge. You can have either a candidate or somebody internally complete it and I show you how it works. But whether or not it's TriMetrix, here are the things that I look for. Number one, as I said earlier, there needs to be a benchmark of the job. You should never be using an assessment that's just assessing people. You got to assess people and compare them to a job. If you're not doing that, I think that you're creeping into an area of legal liability. Number two, and actually this touches on what the earlier question about assessments touches on. Sales is easy to understand and very hard to do. And that actually makes it a good thing to use assessments for. I've been assessing salespeople, and my company has for 15 years. So I like one that looks at multiple peels, meaning, do they take action? Are they motivated for sales? And then do they have an underlying effectiveness and level of sales skill? So I like to combine all those things together. If there are other tools out there that do, or at least purport to do the same thing. This just happens to be the one that I use.
Okay, and then the last question is, are scorecards necessary?
Yes, necessary. I think they're really valuable. And I tell you, I actually have a whole section on scorecards that I just took out for the time, just because we didn't have the time. But any work that you put in up front to defining a job, what does good look like? Any time that you put in to define that is going to more than pay off. It pays off in a couple different ways. First of all, it gets everybody on the same page. And as any of us who've done any hiring know, it's really easy to it's really easy to spend a tremendous amount of time bringing candidates in, send them for a final interview to the CEO, and the CEO says, nah, I don't like it. I think this person needs to be more X, and they're not on the same page. So it gets everybody on the same page, number one. Number two, it helps us to focus our interview. So you put a scorecard together, you know what to look for in the interview, you really peel it back on those particular topics. So those are two reasons. Great question. Definitely do them.
All right, I think that ends our Q&A portion. Thank you so much, Eric, for your time today, and everyone who attended our webinar. Definitely great takeaways from this session today. And again, we'd like to show our contacts. So if you have any questions or feedback for us, you can contact our FPSA staff as well as the Professional Development Committee co-chairs. And then Eric shared with us his information in his previous slides, and this webinar is recorded and will be posted on our website, so it'll be up in a couple of days.
Very good. Well, great to be with you all. I really enjoyed it, and I hope you found it valuable.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
It's not recording. Yeah. Is that it?